Hey guys, I thought I'd read some more of the most bizarre true crime stories ever told. This is titled Murder at the Red Barn. The murder of Maria Martin quickly became one of England's most sensational crimes. After all, as if murder wasn't enough, this case involves illicit affairs, psychic visions, bloodthirsty crowds, and a lingering curse. Maria Martin was born in 1801 to a fairly poor family. Her father, Thomas, was a mole catcher in the village of Polstead in Suffolk. He made his living by skinning moles and making their hides into gloves. After Maria's mother passed away, Thomas had remarried Anne, a woman only a few years older than his daughter. Maria was a beautiful, bright young girl. One account says that a fortune teller once told her she would have many lovers and riches, but would not reach old age. She turned out to be right about two of those three things. In her early 20s, Maria began a love affair with a man named Thomas Corder, the son of a wealthy farm owner. When she got pregnant, Thomas abandoned her. It didn't take long for Maria to replace him, and before she had the baby, she began a relationship with a man named Peter Matthews. Maria's child with Corder died not long after it was born. When Maria became pregnant by Matthews, she once again discovered that the father-to-be was not interested in raising a child or being the subject of a scandal for having a child out of wedlock. He promised to send Maria money, but refused to marry her or have any part in the child's life. Soon after Maria gave birth, she met Thomas Corder's brother, William. William had a reputation as a thief and a petty criminal. After he tried to sell some of his father's livestock without permission, his father had sent him to London with a little money to try and find work and make something out of himself. William wasted the money on his lavish lifestyle and fell into a life of crime. When his father and brothers all fell ill, he had to return to the farm to help his mother run it. William's father passed away with tuberculosis, and his two brothers suffered permanent damage from the disease, which left them both unable to work. William's eldest brother, and the father of Maria's first baby, died soon after his father, falling through the ice into a freezing lake. His other brother also died tragically young, leaving William as the man of the house and the owner of the family farm. William began an affair with Maria. Understandably, his parents did not approve of the relationship, considering William's reputation, and the fact that his brother had abandoned her while she was pregnant with his child. William and Maria were forced to meet in secret. Their favorite spot for the dalliances was the Red Barn, a landmark in the town. After several sessions at the barn, Maria found out she was pregnant for the third time. William, unlike his brother, promised Maria and the family that he would marry her. Any doubts about the relationship had to be put aside. Maria was poor, single mother, who had, by standards of early 19th century England, completely disgraced herself by having several children out of wedlock. William was a wealthy landowner and might have been the last opportunity for Maria to find a man who would marry her and provide for her family. William sent Marie away to Sudbury to have their baby to avoid prying eyes. The infant died 2 weeks later and was clandestinely buried, again to avoid the further damage of both the reputations that a bastard child could bring. Some say that William had something to do with the child's death, and he never intended to marry Maria, though that cannot be definitely proven. After the tragic accident, the couple's relationship became rockier. They fought all the time, and Maria suspected William was stealing the money Peter Matthews was sending her as child support. William promised he still intended to marry Maria, but avoided making any concrete plans to do so. Suddenly, William had a complete change of heart. He suggested he and Maria run away to Ipswich to elope in secret. He even told her there was a warrant out for her arrest for having illegitimate children. It's unclear whether this was true or just part of William's larger plot to get Maria to agree to a rush marriage. Some reports say Maria dressed as a man to sneak away, avoid arrest, and meet William on the night they were to elope. Did William suggest a disguise so nobody would say they saw Maria that night? The pair met at the Red Barn on May 18, 1827, and Maria was never seen alive again. William told the Martin family that there had been an issue with the marriage certificate, but Maria had stayed in Ipswich and was awaiting his return while he tied up loose ends at the farm. Many people in the town were suspicious of him. Maria's family kept asking where and how he was. He had told them she was afraid to return home because of the arrest warrant and the scrutiny he would face from his own town, or she would face from her own town. Having run out of excuses for why he wasn't with his soon-to-be wife, William left town a few weeks after Maria's disappearance. He went to London, then visited the Isle of Wight, where he wrote a series of letters to Maria's family telling them the two had finally gotten married and had settled on the island. He made a series of dim-witted excuses as to why they hadn't received any letters directly from Maria. He said she had in fact been writing and was puzzled why her letters weren't reaching their family. Later he claimed Maria had hurt her hand and couldn't write to them, but assured them that everything was fine, and they were happily married. William returned to London and immediately set about starting a new life. He placed an ad looking for a wife in the Times. Out of more than 100 responses, he chose schoolteacher Mary Moore. They married in November 1827 and opened a school for girls in Ealing. Back in the Martin household, Maria's stepmother began having strange dreams about Maria's whereabouts. These dreams told her that Maria had been murdered and was buried underneath the Red Barn. Unable to shake the feeling that the dreams might be real, Anne asked her husband to go search the barn. Right where his wife's dream said Maria would be, he found a mound of disturbed earth. He took the spike he used to catch moles and began digging around under the soil. There, he found the corpse of his daughter. She had been strangled with a green handkerchief, shot in the face, and seemingly stabbed in the chest and the neck, though these wounds could have come from her father's carelessness with the mole catching spike. One theory suggests that Maria's stepmother, being closer in age and looks to William than her old husband, was also having an affair with William. Some speculate that Anne knew what had happened to Maria all along and was waiting for William to return to town to collect her so they could run away together. When news got to her that William had married someone else in London, she decided to get revenge by exposing the murderer. Anne's dreams did only start after William got married, which was about a year after Maria's death. Although there is no logic to the spirit world, it seems odd that these dreams didn't start sooner. Regardless of who knew what, the authorities were called and a manhunt for William ensued. It was not hard to track him down. He was found at the schoolhouse with his new wife. Despite having spent months corresponding with Maria's family, telling them he was alive and well, William told police he did not know anything about Maria. A French passport was found in the home, suggesting he may have been getting ready to flee the country. William Corder was arrested for Maria's murder, and a massive media frenzy began immediately. Journalists were certain he was guilty. They wrote salacious articles, with the murderer calling him a killer before the trial even began. Articles, books, songs, and plays all came out detailing the crime while William sat in jail awaiting his trial. Pottery and other memorabilia of the Red Barn were made, and the barn itself was totally ransacked by those looking to own a part of the history. Some of the wood from the barn was even sold as toothpicks. Similarly, Maria's grave was chipped away at by these obsessed souvenir hunters. By the time the trial started on August 7th, 1828, William had long since been convicted in the court of public opinion. He even mentioned this to Judge Alexander, who was presiding over the case, saying, "By that powerful engine, the press, which regulates the opinion of so many persons in this country, and is too often, I fear, though unintentionally, the slanderer and destroyer of innocence, I have had the misfortune to be depicted in the most humiliating and revolting characters. I have been described by that press as the most depraved of human monsters." A change of location was not granted, and the trial went ahead. William was charged with several counts of murder by stabbing, strangulation, shooting, and even by burying alive. The rudimentary forensics of the 1800s couldn't determine Maria's actual cause of death, and the court didn't want to risk William getting off on a technicality. He was also being charged with 4 other crimes, such as fraud, just to make sure he went down for something. Tickets were sold to men in town who wished to watch the trial, while others who couldn't get in waited outside to hear the day's news. People poured into the town from across the country. Hotels were fully booked, and some people simply slept outside. One account said the streets were so full of people it took court officials 30 minutes to wade through the onlookers and get into the building. William's defense was that Maria had actually taken her own life at the barn, and he had simply buried her. Of course, this doesn't explain why he lied to the family for months after her death, saying she was alive and happily married. Even if it were an accident, he still very much covered up her death. Whether the evidence against him was just extremely compelling, or the jury was made up of people who had been caught up with sensational media storm before the trial, is not entirely clear. Either way, they only deliberated for 35 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty. Judge Alexander sentenced William to hang. His body was then to be dissected and anatomized for medical study, instead of being given a final resting place. The entire time he was awaiting his fate, William was constantly badgered by court officials for a confession. Eventually, he conceded that he did technically kill Maria, but he had accidentally shot her through the eye, panicked, and buried her. He maintained that he did not stab her, which may have been true, but he didn't explain the handkerchief wrapped around the neck. Again, no explanation of the death excuses the fact that he pretended she was alive for so long afterward. A mere 3 days after his conviction, William was hanged in front of a crowd of at least 7,000 spectators. Some reporters say as many as 20,000. His body was left to swing for an hour before it was taken down. His torso was given a long, deep slice down the front and placed on display for thousands of curious onlookers. He was then totally dissected, and his skeleton was made into a medical prop. The hangman continued to capitalize on the morbid fascination with the crime and sold parts of the rope he had used to hang William. Others followed suit and auctioned things like a lock of Maria's hair and parts of the barn. Somehow William's scalp and one of his ears were taken from the dissection and ended up on display at a museum in London. Perhaps, most gruesomely, William's skin was removed, tanned, and used to bind a book that detailed his crime. It soon became clear that William's spirit was not happy with the way his body had been treated. Dr. John Kilner, a devoted follower of the crime, who owned a lot of memorabilia from the Red Barn, bought or possibly stole William's skull. He immediately started having bad luck, hearing voices and thinking he saw ghosts. One night, Kilner said he heard a loud noise coming from downstairs as he lay in bed. When he investigated, he found that the cabinet where he kept the skull had opened by itself. The box the skull was kept in was cracked, and the skull itself was on the side of the room. Kilner was certain that the skull was cursed by the unhappy spirit of the killer. He paid to have a proper Catholic burial for the skull, giving William a final resting place. The rest of William's body remained on display at the Ontario Museum in London until 2004, when Corder descendants requested it be taken down and cremated.